Polls closed in Chile's presidential elections, and the vote counting called the election for leftist candidate Gabriel Boric. To discuss more on the presidential elections in Chile this Sunday, we now welcome journalist and our collaborator, Dany Shaw.
Good evening.
Dany, we welcome to this special programming of teleSUR English.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, Dany, in your opinion, this victory for Gabriel Boric represents maybe the winning of the progressive forces in South America?
Yeah, this is indubitably the second wave of the pink tide of the Bolivarian momentum. I think even leftist forces were surprised that this was such a definitive victory. I think some of us thought we'd be waiting until the wee hours of the morning to hear the final results. Cast in the right wing used the usual extreme violent tactics, an anti-communist crusade to try to stir up fear of Boric, but the Chilean people were able to overcome that hysteria and that propaganda. Cast was trying to equate a victory for Boric with Chile becoming another Venezuela, Cuba, or Nicaragua, whatever that means. Of course, that's a decontextualized threat when you consider that no countries in the world are under more attack ideologically, diplomatically, and militarily than the three countries that I mentioned. So certainly today, it's a victory not just for the people of Chile, but for the entire continent, hemisphere, and the world.
Also, Dany, we saw several opinions from the people of Chile and also several other guests here in the program, in this broadcasting, that said that Boric is not the radical leftist candidate or maybe the leader they wanted, but they chose or had to take the lead on Boric because of caste, because caste is the return to some policies, some neoliberal policies that Chile is fear of and also is afraid of because of their stain in the history. So what can you say about this perception of Boric not being sufficient leftist or maybe not so radical?
Yeah, I think tonight, first and foremost, for the Chilean people, they're in the streets of Santiago and across the country in celebration mode. Any popular front victory, Apruebo Dignidad and their coalition members have the right to celebrate tonight a victory over fascism and over imperialism's man in Santiago, which would have been cast. But I think for tomorrow, when the celebrations are over and the real work sets in, there are some real questions. I mean, first of all, the positives. Gabriel Boric comes out of the student movement, very youthful. He speaks to the youth of Chile in the continent. Chile hasn't had this type of leader since Salvador Allende. We know the cruel history of the 1973 reactionary violent coup that ended with Salvador Allende and Pablo Neruda and so many others' lives, a vicious, brutal coup. But there are huge questions to be answered. Oftentimes, it's easy to glorify historically the Ernesto Che Guevaras and socialism of the past, but what about the socialism of today, the Bolivarian socialism of Venezuela, of Bolivia, of Cuba, of Nicaragua, and what we see right now playing out in Peru, where there's a Pedro Castillo in the executive, but there's a right wing that controls the fourth estate, the media, and that controls parliament. They've done everything so that Pedro Castillo cannot even have progressive anti-imperialist ministers. I think Honduras is another example. This will play out with Xiomara Castro. And now Gabriel Boric will have similar challenges. One of the most important things that the Boric's, Xiomara Castros, and Pedro Castillos can do is to open up full, Alberto Fernandez in Argentina as well, is open up full economic, diplomatic, and political pathways with the blockaded, besieged countries. for full Latin American continental integration. So I think that's why many critical anti-imperialists are beginning to pose these questions from the very outset.
So, yes, Dany, indeed, we were seeing that the political landscape in Chile is very complex, and the Chileans are maybe divided, maybe they were going to the polls, heading to the polls with another idea. But in this case, I think the option of Boric was more democratic, maybe less repressive, less harsh on Chilean future and the people. But also, I want to see if you have an opinion about Boric, maybe foreign policies, you know, because later, past week, we had the ALBA summit here in Havana. And as we were seeing, many leftist politicians and figures and heads of state are aligning together. You were calling a second pink tide. And in this case, could Boric maybe align to these leftist coalitions, leftist organizations, regional blocs that are forming again?
That's the million-dollar question. Because if the ALBA countries, the countries that are truly anti-imperialist, the workers' states, the most besieged countries, the more and more support that they have, they can overcome these cruel blockades. So this is the million-dollar question with Gabriel Boric, but it's not really a question just for Boric. It's not one individual who is a savior. Only the people can save the people. It's up to the Chilean people, to the tens of millions of Chilean people in the upcoming weeks, months, years, if not decades, to continue to mobilize in that direction and to demand an end to this anti-socialism hysteria, this anti-Bolivarian sentiment, this anti-Venezuela sentiment. We certainly hope that from the ranks of Boric's cabinet emerge many Bolivarians, a foreign policy aimed at integration to counter the Colombias, the Guatemalas, the right-wing launching pads that the U.S. has set up for so long. Of course, their number one, Israel or Zionism in South America, is Colombia, where there's 9 military bases. There's 11 U.S. military bases in Panama. And the biggest U.S. military base, housing over 1,500 U.S. troops, is in Honduras. So part of that foreign policy is for these leaders, if they're truly popular leaders from the depths, from the people, is to go head to head with hegemonic imperialist U.S. interests. So I think the first weeks, the first months will be very important. I don't think we can be naive. This was not a socialist revolutionary, the likes of Thomas Sankara or the likes of Hugo Chavez or Fidel Castro, who won just a short time ago. So many of these questions remain to be answered.
Yes, indeed. The future will tell. Time will tell in this case. So, Dany, any observations you had on this process? Any opinions, comments you want to join us? You want to share with us? I beg your pardon.
Yeah, I mean, Gabriel Boric has a mandate from the Chilean people. He won confidently. He won handedly. To see this right-wing fascist caste recognize it really in the early morning, the early hours of this afternoon, I think surprised some of us. But the right wing and their imperialist sponsors can spin on a dime. We can expect the U.S. Embassy, the State Department, U.S. intelligence services, U.S. Capitol, of course, the same way in 1973 that they sabotaged the Chilean democratic socialist process. They are going to use every type of hybrid, creative, innovative way to halt their worst fear, which is South American and Caribbean and third world unity and integration. We have to remain vigilant, but certainly for the Joe Biden White House, South America is setting a strong example. We just saw the victory in the local elections in Venezuela. A weekend later, the massive victory of the Partido Libre in Tegucigalpa in Honduras, and now this victory from Santiago de Chile. So the people of South America, almost 700 million people, more than twice the population of the United States, are sending a clear message. We are not your backyard. It's not 1824. The Monroe Doctrine is over. And we hope that, like Rafael Correa in 2006, Boric and Pedro Castillo immediately say no to all of these U.S. military bases and installations spread across the continent. We saw the imperialists go down to Argentina right after the MAS had won in Bolivia. They know that then when they can divide, they can conquer and reconquer. So Boric has a huge historical responsibility on his shoulders to truly fulfill the vision, the dream of Salvador Allende, of Miguel Enriquez, of so many Chileans. How many tens of thousands of Chileans, of Uruguayans, of Paraguayans, of Argentinians in these dirty wars, this Cold War, which was never a Cold War, it was a hot war. It was a global class war that took out the brightest daughters and sons of an entire generation, of several generations. And it's that anti-communist past that Chile seeks to overcome now. That's a lot on Gabriel Boric's shoulders. That's why we have to look beyond Boric, what will be his initial cabinet picks. Right away, the Chilean media, the Sebastián Piñeras, the billionaire class who own the central arteries of the Chilean economy and the means of communication, right away they're going to attack any gesture of friendship, of integration towards Venezuela, towards Cuba, towards Bolivia, towards Nicaragua. They will immediately attack in a new Cold War type fashion, and how Boric responds will say a lot about the upcoming years.
That's so true. So thank you, Dany, for being with us, for your criteria, your time, your analysis. You, as always, share your thoughts with teleSUR English.